with you. Lord, be with our team that is in West Coast now. Lord, I pray you would be with them, give them strength. Lord, give them good mindset, and Lord, bring them back safely to us. And Lord, be with Brother Josh as he teaches tonight. Lord, I pray you would help him and bless him. We love you, and we're so thankful for all that you've done. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. If you are involved in one of the discipleship classes, you can leave. If not, the rest of you stick around.
All right, on the fourth verse, so amid the conflict, whether great or small. Sing it tonight. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Help and comfort give you till your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. Good singing, you may be seated. Come on, Brother Josh.
Why do bad things happen to good people? That's a question that has been asked for centuries, for millennia. It's a question you've probably asked yourself. It's been asked by a lot of people. It's a question that is important to know the answer to. And it's a question that, you could word it another way, not just why do bad things happen to good people, but why do bad things happen to me? Why do bad things happen to my family? Why do bad things happen to the people that I love and care about? This is a question, why do bad things happen to good people? Many would say the oldest book in the Bible, the first book written in the Bible. And it's something that we're going to deal with tonight. I want to walk you through the book of Job. And the book of Job, of course, you can go ahead and turn there. We'll start in chapter 1, but we're going to walk through it. This is Wednesday night, and obviously there's a great spiritual truth in this, but we also want to study the Bible a little bit and understand the Bible. And so we'll go ahead and open the Bible to the book of Job. And, I can say that, this question and this book of the Bible, it's played on my mind quite a bit through the years. Now, I know you look at me, you think, man, you're just a young guy. I'm 35. That feels old to me, but I know to some of you, that feels like it'd be young. I'm getting a thumbs up there. Well, my wife and I know what it's like to have a child, 18-month-old baby, go through kidney cancer, 8 months of chemotherapy, radiation, surgeries, portacaths, all this kind of stuff at 18 months while we were on deputation going to Argentina. We have buried both of Jennifer's parents. We've had 2 children diagnosed with autism, special needs, have to come off the field of Argentina and be ripped away and come to the United States to figure out what in the world the Lord wanted us to do here. I just got news in the past month that my father has Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and so there's just numbered months or years at that point. We all have, now I've listed a few things that I've gone through. I don't know all of you, but I'm sure that you've gone through some stuff. I'm sure that you've had some issues. I'm sure there's been job losses and family issues and sicknesses and tragedies that you've experienced. And, you want to know yourself why these things happen. And, if everything's going great and everything has always been going great, that's awesome. I'm really happy for you. I really am. That's awesome. Maybe I don't see too many young people in here, or, really young. I don't want to offend anybody, No teenagers, I don't think. Yeah. Sam, you're not a teenager, right? Okay, all right. No teenager. Well, if everything's great, you need to be able to be an encouragement from the scriptures to other people that are going through something. Because people are watching our lives, and when we are faced with tragedy, when we're faced with difficult circumstances, they're looking at our testimony. It reflects on our Savior, it reflects on our God, it reflects on our relationship with Him. So this is very important. It's something I want to share with you that I've learned from the scriptures, from this book of Job. And I want to walk through the book of Job with you and give you an overview and hit at that main point, what it's all about in this book, okay? So we're in Job chapter 1. Just to give you an idea of the structure of the book of Job, okay? The book of Job is a poetic book. It's part of the writings in the Old Testament. And we think that it was written by Job himself, but it would have been written in the time of probably the patriarchs, or maybe even before, because there's no mention of the law. There's no mention of Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or certain promises and covenants that are mentioned later in the scriptures. And so more than likely it was before the time of Moses. And Job was living in the land, and he was a very rich man. The Bible talks about his integrity, and that's pretty popular. But the book of Job is divided up into a few parts. The first part is the prologue, and that is a narrative section where it's telling a story and setting the scene. And then at the end, you have the epilogue, where it is summing up the story and giving just the results of everything that happened. And it's also narrative, just wrapping up the story. And in the middle of the body of Job, you have two parts, the dialogues and then the monologues. So the dialogues is really a debate. And we'll meet these friends of Job in a moment that come. And then there's these monologues where a fourth friend shows up, and it's not an argument, it's not a debate, it's not in these rounds of debate. It is just he is speaking and continues to speak because everyone else has already said everything they can say. And then finally, Jehovah God shows up in the whirlwind and gives the final answer over all this question of why do bad things happen to good people? Why did this happen to Job if he's so just and upright, a man that eschews evil and doeth good? Why did this happen to him? His friends have opinions. Job has opinions. His fourth friend comes in and shares his opinion. But at the end, God shows up and gives the real, final, solid answer. And that's what I want to focus on in the time that we have tonight. But let's walk through it a little bit and set the scene. So we have in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000. So, like I said, it lists how Job is great. He's got 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, a very great household. He is a rich man, and he's a good man, a just man. And what happens is that God, I think many of you know the story already, God has a time where the angels present themselves, and even Satan is in this situation. And God is the one that points out Job. Says, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan he says, look down at verse 9. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. So this is important. Look what God says. He says, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So there's these 2 trials that begin this prologue of Job that set the scene. And the first trial is God sets the limits to it. He says, okay, Satan, fine. You can do anything you want, but don't touch him. And look what happens to him. Verse 13. And before we even read it, sometimes we get the idea that the Bible is just like this story or it's a book or something. The Bible is describing a real person, real people that lived in a real time, in a real place. It says he lived in the land of Uz. This is a real person. So put yourself in his shoes. You've got a great family. You've got a great business going on. Everything is going great. And then this happens. Verse 13. And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Now, this is like a cascading event, okay? So you imagine this servant, out of breath, bursting through the door and saying, hey, they killed your servants, Job. And before he even finishes speaking, the next servant comes in, And says in verse 16, the fire of God is fallen from heaven and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Verse 17, then while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of his house, or of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Back to back to back, everything he has. You know, the asses, they're gone. The sheep, they're gone. The camels, all these servants are killed in the midst of those. And now, the worst of all, his sons and his daughters, his children. Can you imagine hearing that news? Now, Job, he starts out good. He passed the first trial. He passed the first test. He says, then Job arose, verse 20, and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Okay, so then let's sum up. The next trial, Satan comes and says, well, you know, you didn't touch him. That's why he didn't curse you and die. This is like I don't want to say wager, but it's this, you know, God and Satan are arguing about the uprightness of his servant. And Satan said, well, of course, you know, he's got all these riches. And God says, you can touch everything he has. Don't touch him. And so Satan touches everything he has, all his children and all his possessions, his livelihood, everything's gone. And then Satan says, well, sure, but if you touch him directly, he'll curse you. And so God says, but look at verse 6. And the Lord, this is chapter 2 now. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. You see how God put the limit there? He said, okay, you can touch him. You can do whatever you want to him, but keep him alive. And then the next thing that happens is that he has boils from the sole of his foot to his crown. So from his feet to his head, he's covered in nasty, gross, painful sores. And he's actually taking pieces of pots and broken pots and scraping his body. And it's a nasty, gross thing, painful thing. On top of that, his wife comes and says, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. His wife now. What an encouragement, you know. I'm so thankful. My wife is back here. I'm so thankful for my wife. You know, she's always got sweet words. And you know, sometimes I'll ask her, how was that sermon, honey? How'd that go? And she'll, even if it was bad, you know, she'll find a way to turn it around and sweeten up the words. She could say the meanest thing to you, and it would just sound sweet. You know what I mean? You'd thank her for it. She's from Kentucky, so, you know, down south, things are a little different, you know. Bless your heart, that kind of stuff. Well, Job's wife, she was pretty blunt. And she just said, listen, you're in a pitiful shape. Why don't you just curse God and you'll die and you'll be out of your misery? But, verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. So then, the scene is set. We've got this horrible tragedy that's befallen on Job. And then his friends come, verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Okay, we've got Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. All right? It says that, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent everyone his mantle. It goes on. They spent 7 days, they didn't say a word. I mean, they're just, sometimes, you know, some tragedy happens to someone, there's nothing to say. It's just silence. And sometimes you don't need to say anything. But they sat there 7 days, 7 nights, and just stared at each other and didn't know what to say. And then finally Job speaks. And this is what begins this debate. And there's really 3 rounds of debate that happen here. and each, Job will speak, and then, or he opens everything up with this first speech, and then in poetic format, they all speak to each other. Now, this may seem like a strange thing, but we don't really speak in soliloquies and poetry when we speak to one another. But God has recorded it. These men, they spoke not in rhyming words, but in parallelism. Hebrew parallelism is what is Hebrew poetry. That is what it's all about. It's a rhyme, not of words, of sounds, but of the thoughts and the ideas. So they'll have, they'll say a line, and then the next line will either mirror that line with different style, or it'll be a contrast. And that's the way Hebrew poetry is. And God was very wise in the way that the style of poetry of the Old Testament, because if it depended on words rhyming, that wouldn't translate very well into Spanish and into other languages. But with it being the parallelism or the rhyming of ideas and the thoughts, then the first line matches the second line or contrasts it, and it's timeless. God is all wise. But so they get up and they speak to one another, and they're speaking in this very poetic form. There's something in Argentina that they call payasos, or payadores, I'm sorry. Payaso is a clown. That's a different thing. But payador, and they'll play guitar, and they'll go back and forth, and it's all improvised, So imagine, people can still do that today. Imagine when they didn't have television and everything and the internet to distract them from everything. People could hold a lot more in their mind, And so God has recorded this for us. And it opens up, and Job, he doesn't, it sounds like it's weighed on him over this week. He's had a lot of time to think about things, and his attitude doesn't seem to be as quite what it was at the beginning. Chapter 3, verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. And he goes on. Basically, his first speech to everyone is he's cursing the day he was born. Now, his friends, they think he's got the wrong attitude, and so they want to correct him. They say, well, and so they come in and they have their ideas. We've all got our ideas on why bad things happen to people, right? Something happens to someone, you're like, oh, well, yeah, you shouldn't have done. You did A, and then B is going to follow. That's the formula, And the friends come in, they've got their ideas on why this has happened. And they all have a variation of the same theme. We'll read a little bit just to give you a flavor for what these friends are saying, and then we'll sort of skip on to the larger section of the book. But so Eliphaz is the first one to get up and speak, and he says, or to respond to Job, And then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it has come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils they are consumed. The roaring of the lion and the voice of the fierce lion and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The old lion perisheth for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. So he goes on, and basically what he's saying, he says it very clearly, really, is that, whoever faced this kind of evil without doing something wrong, you're not innocent. He's saying you have to be guilty. This is and one after another, they have these rounds of debate, and basically they're saying you did something wrong. You need to confess it, and you need to get right with God. They don't know the backstory. They don't know what happened. Job even doesn't know at this point what happened. It's not always the case that the bad thing that's happened to you is a direct result from a specific sin in your life. And then Job, so the formula of this is it goes, Eliphaz, and then Job, and then Bildad, and then Job responds to him, and then Zophar, and then Job, and then it repeats the cycle, round 2, and then the same exact scenario. Round 3 is a little different. At this point, everyone is exasperated. They have heard enough of one another. I won't go into reading it would be fun to get into it a little bit, but I don't know what your attention span is, so it's hard to know. Do you love the Bible? It's pretty good. Some of you like it. Some of you don't. I don't know. Those are always unfair. It's like, how much do you respond? You feel like you're far away. Sometimes preachers have to, run around and jump on pews to make sure that everyone's paying attention. We can read a little bit of what some of the other guys said. Let's look at what Bildad said. In chapter 8, chapter 8, verse 1, so this is still in round 1. This is Bildad's turn. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, How long wilt thou speak these things? And how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind? You ever hear someone talking about just a bunch of hot air, that kind of stuff? He's saying that. Your words are just a strong wind. I love how expressive they are. Doth God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes, and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. So he's saying, if you're saying you're innocent, Job, if you're innocent, then you're calling God out and saying that he's wrong. Which is it, Job? Is God right, or are you right? Job is maintaining his innocence in all this and saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know why this happened to me. And in fact, in this answer, when Job is talking, he expresses his desire to talk to God, really to contend with God, to be put on trial and prove to God his pureness, his innocency. Because you got to think, in this, Job's thinking, I didn't do anything wrong. I've been doing the same thing I've always been doing, and yet why did this happen to me? I know we're walking through the book of Job, but we realize this isn't just about Job. This is about you and me and our response. Now, look in chapter 9. Verse 32, he says, For he is not a man. Job is now talking, and he's talking about God. He said, For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us, that he might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not this fear terrify me. Then would I speak and not fear him, but it is not so with me. So he's starting to express his desire to want to talk with God. And chapter 10, verse 1, it continues what he's saying. He's saying, My soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God. And so now everything that follows till the end of the chapter is Job saying, this is what I would say to God if he were here face to face, if I could talk to him like a man, if I could just look into his eyes and speak, this is what I would say to God. Listen to some of what Job says. Verse 2, he says, I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me. Is it good unto thee that thou shouldest oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of thine hands and shine upon the counsel of the wicked? Hast thou eyes of flesh, or seest thou as a man seeth? Are thy days as the days of man? Are thy years as a man's days? That thou inquirest after mine iniquity and searchest after my sin? Thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thy hand. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. Remember, I beseech, this is Job saying, this is what I would say to God if he was here face to face. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me unto dust again? Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with the skin and flesh, and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. He goes on, and verse 15, it says, if I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I'm full of confusion. He says, thou huntest me. He's talking to what he would say to God. He said, thou huntest me as a fierce lion. You ever feel hunted by God? You ever feel like God is pursuing you? You ever question if God is truly just? If he's, you hear something about a preacher or some young family, and they're gone. You know, they fall off a ladder, or they get in a car wreck, have a terrible disease, and all of a sudden they're gone. You wonder, what in the world? Maybe something's happened to you. So he's questioning God, wondering what's this all about? He's saying, this is what I would say to God. Zophar, when he speaks to him in chapter 11, verse 1, he says, then answered Zophar the Naamathite and said, should not the multitude of words be answered? And should a man full of talk be justified? Should thy lies make men hold their peace? And when thou mockest, shall no man make thee ashamed? For thou hast said, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thine eyes. But, O man, that God would speak and open his lips against thee, and that he would show thee the secrets of wisdom that are double to that which is. Know therefore that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth. Here's something I want you to understand. As you're reading through Job, we have God's record of what these men said to one another. And the thing is, not all of the men, actually none of them are all right. In other words, there's some truth into what they say, but they don't have the full picture. And so they're arguing all these different angles about why these things are happening, and they don't know the full story like God does. And so sometimes you'll have someone, Bildad or Zophar or even Job, and they'll say something that, that's true and right. And then another thing they'll say, it's like, you know what? I think you crossed the line right there. You have to understand the book of Job in its full context, okay? So this first part of the body of Job then is these dialogues, these debates. So they're going back and forth. We're in round 1. Round 2 just is the same pattern, the same structure, but they're getting a little more direct with one another, a little more frustrated with one another. By round 3, I think it's, Zophar, he doesn't even answer the third time. When it gets to his turn, he's like, I got nothing else to say. You ever been there in an argument? Nothing else to say. That's whenever, in chapter 32, that's whenever the fourth friend, the younger, he starts to speak. And that's when the monologues. So these guys have said everything they need to say at this point. Gone back and forth. They just got frustrated with one another. Doesn't seem like anybody's really convincing anyone. And Elihu shows up. Verse 32, it says, so these 3 men ceased to answer Job, because he was righteous in his own eyes. You see? Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the kindred of Ram, against Job was his wrath kindled, because he justified himself rather than God. And that's something that you see as you walk through, is that Job gets more and more bold in proclaiming his innocence, and he starts thinking that, I'm innocent. Maybe God's the one that messed up. It sounds harsh to say it out loud, but if there was a microphone into our thoughts and a speaker projecting out, we've thought some things like that. But look at verse 3. It says, also against his 3 friends was his wrath kindled, because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Now, Elihu had waited till Job had spoken, because they were elder than he. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, then his wrath was kindled. And Elihu the son of Barachel The Buzite answered and said, and then we have him starting to speak. And it's funny because he's got to get going. The first chapter of what he says is just saying, okay, I waited for you guys. I waited my turn, and now I'm going to speak. If you listen, I'm going to speak. Now, hey, guys, I want you to be ready because I'm going to say something, okay? In a minute, I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear me, okay? He just goes on and on, kind of getting up the courage to talk to these elder men and tell them and set them straight. He thinks he's going to set them straight. And in a way, he does. He's probably the more correct. He definitely is more correct than the three friends of Job. And so in the narrative, it summarizes exactly what he thought. Job was wrong because he was justifying himself more than God, and his friends are wrong because they hadn't come up with a reason for why this happened to Job. And so he goes on and on. I think the best thing would be to get and spend most time with what God says when God shows up. So let's go ahead and skip on to chapter 38, verse 1. So Elihu has gone on, and that whole time, from 32 to the end of 37, Elihu, that's why I call it a monologue, because it's just him talking. No one else is talking, it's just him. But then the Lord shows up. So look at verse 1 of chapter 38. And we're reading a lot of scripture. I think you guys are with me, though, right? We're not, I haven't lost you. All right. I saw, 2 heads shaking no. I heard one grunt. I'm not sure if that's a good enough answer or not, but it might be the best one I can get, so I'm not sure if I should, Are you with me? Do we need to go back and... No, I'm kidding. Well, no, we got it. Don't go backwards. Only forwards. All right. All right. I don't know if it came across when I was trying to introduce everything, but the principles that I learned through this book helped me through a lot of difficult times. And I just want you to see it too. Maybe you've already seen it, and that's great, but we need to be reminded because it's not like something bad happens to us once in life and then it's all done. Chapter 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Remember, Job, remember from before? He's like, I wish God was here. I would tell him what I think. I would defend myself. I would make my claim. Remember, now God has shown up. God is here. God is speaking to Job in this whirlwind, but he's face to face. The friends are there, all the 4 friends. And God is saying, hey, stand up like a man. I'm going to demand of you, and I want you to answer me, okay? And so God begins to, I love it. God actually uses sarcasm. I love sarcasm. And God is, I love this. So we'll just read it, okay? All right. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed? Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it may take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee, or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof, that thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest know the path to the house thereof? Knowest thou it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? See what he's doing? He's challenging Job. He's saying, hey, were you there when I made all this stuff? When I created the heavens and the earth and the deep and were you there? Oh, you go ahead and tell me, Job. You were there, right? You're old enough. You were born already whenever this was going on, when I was creating the universe. Let's continue. Verse 22. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a watercourse for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, or the wilderness where there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth? Hath the rain a father? Or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice and the hoary frost of heaven? Who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Now he's talking about stars and constellations, the galaxies, all this stuff. He's talking about space. Verse 34. Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings, that they may go and say unto thee, here we are? Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can stay the bottles of heaven when the dust groweth into hardness and the clouds cleave fast together? And then God, so God has talked about creation at this point. Creation of the foundations of the earth, the seas, the rivers, and the weather, lightning and storms and snow and rain and hail. God has talked about this kind of thing. He's talked about the stars. He's saying, where were you when I did all this? And then he switches gears into creation of the animals. And we'll skip a little faster now. Verse 39. Wilt thou hunt the prey for the lion, or fill the appetite of the young lions when they couch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? So he talks about lions. Verse 41, he talks about ravens. Chapter 39, verse 1, he talks about the wild goats and the hinds, and he's pointing out little things about them that are, how does that work? And, even to this day, we're amazed when we watch a nature show or something, or you go out into nature and you see how the animals interact with one another, and it's mind-boggling how, you have these systems where this animal is dependent on this animal that's dependent on this animal. It's like, how in the world did all this come together this way? Verse 9, he talks about when the Bible says unicorn, it's talking about a rhinoceros, just in case anybody's confused about that. A little helpful, just a little helpful tidbit there. All right. He talks about peacocks in verse 13. In verse 19, he talks about horses. My little daughter is in love with horses. I asked her what her favorite state was. She said, Kentucky. I thought maybe it's because my wife is from Kentucky, and we spent some time there. We have family there. And she said, no, it's the horse capital of the world. I love horses. So, he talks about in verse 26 the hawk and the eagle. And look at what it says when God finishes this in chapter 40, verse 1. He says, Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. When he says he that reproveth God, he's talking about Job. He's calling Job out and saying, hey, you're the one that you're reproving, you're rebuking God. Go ahead and answer this question. Now look at the response of Job. It's a little different now, all right, guys? It's a little bit different. Chapter 40, verse 3. Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once have I spoken, but I will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. Job is saying, hey, I'm vile, I'm wicked. I've got nothing to say. You know, I said a lot of stuff before, but I got nothing else to say now. I'm vile. But God's not finished with him. He's not finished. Verse 6 of chapter, 40? Then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold everyone that is proud, and abase him. Look on everyone that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in their dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee. Then he goes on, he gives this example of the behemoth, verse 15. Now behold now behemoth, which I have made. And he goes on and he talks about this mighty creation that God made. And, if God made that, then, talking about his power and the wisdom that God has. Chapter 41, he switches to the Leviathan. Verse 1, Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? And he's talking about how God made this great sea creature, and the wisdom that God had to make that, and how it all fits together, and the power of this great beast. And saying, if you're not even as powerful as something that I made, what makes you think that you're smarter and more powerful than the one who made it? It's really what God is saying to him. And so, look at how Job responds in chapter 42, verse 1, when God has finished talking about Behemoth and then the Leviathan. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Here I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes. So Job, even though he didn't do anything specific to cause this great tragedy in his life, and he was innocent in that sense, he realizes in the end that when he was justifying himself and questioning God and why God did this and why God did this, and when God showed up, he realized that he wasn't just like God. He was a good man, but he wasn't as good as God. He's a smart and a wise man. He wasn't as smart and as wise as God is. Now, the ending of the story, I think Job prays for his friends. God has them repent. Job prays for him. He forgives the friends, but then he restores them. It's pretty interesting. He had 7,000 sheep. Now he's got 14,000. He had 3,000 camels. Now he's got 6,000. Now 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 asses, and he has 10 more children. And so God blessed him greatly. But what's the big idea of all this? What's the big point of Job? And did you see? We didn't read every word, but did you see in anything that we read where God answered directly why he let this bad thing happen to Job? Did he ever answer the question? He didn't, did he? But Job still got the answer that he needed. When Job said, here, let's look at it again. These are really important words. I know that thou canst do everything. This is chapter 42, verse 1. Verse 2. I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. God, you're all powerful. You're all knowing. Those are the two big things that God was revealing about himself whenever he was asking Job all those questions. Those rhetorical questions, God knew the answer to them. He wanted Job to sit down and think about what was being said. He said, where were you when I created the earth? Hey, you're so smart. Why don't you tell me? Hey, you're so old. You're so powerful. You can do these great things, right? Why don't you tell me? This question that we ask ourselves, that has been asked for forever, it seems, why do bad things happen to good people? The premise is flawed. There are no good people. We are, in our best state, we are sinners, and our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. We've fallen short. We may be good people, we may be moral people, but we don't compare to God. We have wicked thoughts, we have wicked actions, wicked deeds. We say things we wish later on we didn't say. We think things that are mean or vile. We're wicked human flesh. We sin, we do wrong. So anything that happens to us that's good is more than we deserve. Anything that bad that happens to us isn't even the full extent of what we deserve when you think about hell being the punishment for sin and separation from God. But what's the big idea? What is God getting across? What does the message of Job bring forth? What is that big idea? Is that we don't have to know the answer to why God does everything, or why all bad kind of things and evil and tragedy. We don't have to know the answer exactly why all these things happen to us. But we do need to trust that God is all-knowing and that He is all-powerful. Now, here's another thing that we learn from Job that's related to this, is that it's nothing that bad, none of the evil that comes to us, none of the bad things that happen come without God permitting it. God said, okay, you can touch everything he has, but don't touch him. So Satan touched everything he had, but he couldn't touch Job. God did not permit it. God did not allow that to happen. Satan challenges him again, and God says, okay, you can touch him, but let him live. Don't let him die. You can touch him, do whatever you want to his body, but he's going to live. That's saying God, anything that, all these tragedy, all these bad things, any evil thing, anything that is unpleasant to us that happens to us, Almighty God in his infinite wisdom and power has authorized it. He's allowed it to happen in your life. Now, we can trust him because he is all-wise. You see, Job didn't have all the information. Eliphaz didn't have all the information. Bildad didn't have all the information. Zophar didn't have the information. Eliphaz had a lot, but didn't have it all. Eliphaz, right? They didn't have everything. God knows everything. He knows from the beginning to the end. He's backwards and forwards, under every crack, over every hiding place, every molecule. He knows where it exists, every atom in the universe. He has all that in his mind, and he has the power to do with his creation whatever he sees fit. We want to know why. And sometimes God lets us know. But sometimes we're not going to have the answers. Sometimes we're not going to understand. But we need to trust God. He has the right to do with his creation as he sees fit. He's all powerful. He's all wise. He has a plan, and he's only going to permit things, or the only things that the only evil that will come to you is evil that God permits to come into your life. We could trust that. Look what he did with Job. Job didn't know that backstory. Job didn't know that God had been talking with Satan about this. But look what God did with it. He didn't just bless Job by giving him double of everything. He's given us hope. God, through Job's story, has given us hope. Because with such an extreme example, I mean, a lot of us have had bad things happen to us, but who's lost 10 children in a day? Who's gone from what would be in today's term a multi-billionaire to having nothing? Such a tragedy, so sharp, so quick. And God used that horrible tragedy to be a blessing, to be an encouragement, a comfort in time of great tragedies to millions of Christians throughout the centuries. See, God had a plan in Job. Job didn't understand that, but God was working in his life, and God sees past all these things that we see. God sees past all that, and he is working in us. He's working through us in our lives. He's using these difficult things for his glory and for the encouragement and benefit of other people. We can trust him. It's not easy all the time, but we learn from Job's example that we can trust our almighty, all-knowing God who cares enough about us to set very specific parameters to what he allows to happen to us with his great, masterful plan in mind that can help not only us, but others around us. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we love you. We thank you for your word. Thank you for just this great truth of how wonderful you are, even though we don't understand everything. Lord, help us to be reminded if we're in a tragedy or a difficult situation, a trial right now, we're going through something. Lord, help us to remember these words. Help us to remember the example of Job. Lord, I pray that if we're not going through something now, that you'd help us to be an encouragement and uplift other people, show them the truth of who you are in the midst of everything that may be difficult. Lord, I thank you for what this message has done in my life, this message of Job. I pray that you would help us just to really think on these things and to understand something about you. We ask this in the precious name of Christ. Amen. I forgot that I'm closing things, so I guess we're dismissed.